Salam, peace be upon you, Rafiq. We just came from part 43, where we installed a strange, powerful permission. Latent self-applicability. Phi can, in principle, apply its own distinction capacity to itself. In plain words, once patterns get rich enough, they can begin to encode other patterns, refer to other patterns, and eventually refer to themselves. That was our bridge from mere comparability to the possibility of observers, self-models, and reflective systems. Now we step into part 44, and it is the most severe seal of all. Not severe as punishment, severe as a firewall. The metaphysical necessity seal says, Phi is unavoidable. Any attempt to conceive reality without Phi uses Phi in the very act of conceiving it. And this is not an opinion. It is not, I like Phi. It is not, Phi feels deep. It is a structural claim about what it means to think, ask, deny, doubt, imagine, compare, define, or mean anything at all. So today we do something rare. We build a foundation where the most honest move is not to invent more words, but to show where words collapse into their own roots. We will keep it simple. We will keep it story-like, but the spine will be hard. Prediction and falsification will sit in the center. And briefly, as always, the formal mathematical works behind these concepts can be found on Zenodo by searching for Holophase. Imagine you are holding a lantern in a cave. You can point the lantern at walls, at stones, at drawings, at your own hands. You can illuminate almost anything. Then someone asks you, "Show me the darkness." So you point the lantern at a dark corner. But the moment you point the lantern, the corner is no longer dark. You have shown lit up rock, not darkness. So you try another trick. You close your eyes. But that gives you a field of black. And even that black is a kind of experience, a kind of presence. It is not the pure absence of seeing. It is seeing black, which is still within the domain of sight. So you try again. Let me imagine what it is like to have no eyes at all. But the act of imagining is already a mental event. It is already something. It already has a boundary. Imagination versus not imagination. You cannot perform the act of witnessing no witnessing without witnessing. That is the first taste of part 44. Phi is not a thing in the cave. Phi is the lantern condition, the permission that makes this rather than that even possible. To ask for reality without Phi is like demanding a lantern-lit demonstration of lanternlessness. The demand eats itself. Now take the most famous philosophical question that almost everybody eventually meets. Why is there something rather than nothing? Listen carefully to what you have already done just by asking it. You used something, and that word is meaningless unless it stands against not something. You used nothing, and nothing is only meaningful as not something. You used rather than, which is pure comparison. You used why, which assumes a difference between reasons that count and reasons that don't. So in the act of asking the question, you smuggled in the very ingredient you are trying to step behind: distinction. This is not a cheap gotcha. It is the core. Some questions are not merely unanswered, they are structurally self-consuming. It's like asking, what existed before existence? The phrase before already depends on time ordering, and time ordering is one of the things you claim you want to get behind. Or like asking, what language was used to write the first dictionary? You are using the concept of definition to ask for the origin of definition. Or like asking, what rule justifies the rule that only justified rules count? You have built a loop. Phi is the loop maker, the minimal permission that makes rule, question, difference, meaning, identity, negation, and comparison possible at all. So part 44 says, you can climb many ladders, but you cannot climb below the possibility of ladders. Here is the seal stated cleanly. Core claim. Phi is unavoidable. Any attempt to conceive reality without Phi uses Phi to conceive it. Now the discipline. Prediction and falsification. Prediction. All why-Phi questions collapse into operational circularity. If you push them hard enough, they either secretly reintroduce distinction, Phi, or dissolve into non-meaning. No public concept remains. Falsification. Provide a coherent conception of reality without comparability that doesn't secretly use distinction. That is the test. Not argue against Phi, not dislike Phi. Construct a coherent, communicable conception of no comparability that does not re-import comparison in disguise. If you can do that, this seal fails. Now we attempt to break it ourselves, because that's how firewalled work behaves. It invites the attack. Attempt 1. Absolute uniformity. Someone says, fine, I'll imagine a reality where everything is perfectly uniform, no differences anywhere, so comparability is gone. But notice what you did to build this uniformity. You said everything. That is already a grouping. It distinguishes members from non-members. Even if you pretend it's one thing, one is a distinction against many. You said uniform. Uniform is defined against non-uniform. That is comparison again. You said everywhere. Everywhere implies a domain across which the uniformity holds. A domain is already a structure that allows location-like talk, even if you claim no space. And even if you try to strip those words, you still need this. You must distinguish this imagined uniformity from other imaginings. So you did not escape comparability. You describe the world by using comparability-laden terms. Uniformity is not without distinction. Uniformity is a special case of distinction language. It is the claim that all comparisons yield same. But same is a comparative result. It presupposes the comparison engine. Attempt 1 fails. Attempt 2, pure nothingness. Someone says, okay then, reality without Phi is just nothing. No objects, no properties, no relations. Done. But again, notice what happened. To assert nothing, you distinguished nothing from something. To call it pure, you distinguished pure from impure. To state it, you performed a speech act that exists as a distinguishable event in a conversation. You have already created a pattern that is different from silence. Even the concept nothing is a concept, which means it sits inside the mental space where concepts differ. So the nothingness you propose is not the absence of distinction. It is a distinct idea inside a system of distinctions. Attempt 2 fails. Attempt 3. One seamless unity. Someone says, then I'll imagine reality as an undivided whole. No parts, no edges, no boundaries. Pure unity. But unity is defined against multiplicity. Whole is defined against part. Undivided is defined against divided. This is not escaping Phi. It is using Phi at full volume. And more deeply, If absolutely no boundaries exist, then this unity cannot be separated from not this unity. The very act of referring to it collapses. A perfectly boundaryless unity cannot be pointed to without drawing a conceptual boundary around it. And drawing that boundary is phi in action. Attempt 3 fails. Attempt 4. Direct experience without concepts. Someone says, I won't use concepts. I'll go beneath language. I'll refer to pure, immediate experience. But experience is distinguished from non-experience. Immediate is distinguished from mediated. Pure is distinguished from mixed. Even if you drop words, the moment you try to communicate this pure experience to another person, you must encode it as a difference in shared symbols. A public comparator chain, part 37. Inside a window, part 32. With coherence, part 33. You re-enter phi immediately. And if you refuse communication, you have left the public domain. You are no longer offering a coherent conception in the sense required to falsify this seal. You have retreated into private ineffability, which cannot count as a public falsification. Attempt 4 fails. Attempt 5. Mathematical emptiness. Someone says, I'll use the empty set, no elements. That's reality without phi. But set theory is built on membership. And membership is a distinction. Element versus not an element. Even empty is meaningful only against non-empty. And even if you want a pure formal void, you still rely on identity. The empty set is the empty set, not some other object. So your formalism presupposes the very engine it tries to erase. Attempt 5 fails. So far, every attempt has done one of two things. It uses distinction openly or secretly. Or it becomes unstatable, not communicable, not shareable, not even stably thinkable. This is exactly what the seal predicts. Now let's turn this from clever traps into a clear picture you can carry. Imagine you are trying to write a dictionary that defines every word. You open to meaning. It says, what a word expresses. You open to express. It says, to convey meaning. You open to word. It says, a unit of language. You notice the loop. Dictionaries cannot define everything without some primitive terms, because definition itself needs a bedrock. But now, here is the deeper twist. This is not merely a limitation of dictionaries. It is a limitation of any system that tries to justify its own ground using only tools that depend on that ground. Even if you expand the dictionary into an encyclopedia, and the encyclopedia into a full library of all science, you still eventually reach words like same, different, is, not, if, and, or, before, after, cause, effect. Those words are not learned by definition first. They are learned by use inside the world of distinctions. They are part of the comparability engine. Phi is the comparability engine's permission layer. So part 44 says, the foundation is not a hidden object you haven't found yet. It is the possibility of finding anything as anything. Now bring back the lantern in the cave. The lantern cannot show you lanternlessness as an object, because the lantern is the condition of showing. This does not mean the lantern is magical. It means you cannot use a tool to demonstrate the absence of the tool without using the tool. In philosophy, this structure appears in many forms. Kant argued that certain categories are conditions of possible experience. Descartes found that doubting still presupposes thinking. Wittgenstein warned that some things cannot be spoken without speaking nonsense, and that the ladder you climb on can be thrown away. But here we add the holophase twist. This ladder cannot be thrown away, because even the act of throwing away requires keep versus discard, which is a distinction. You don't have to accept these names, they're just echoes. The core is simple. To deny the possibility of distinction, you must distinguish denial from non-denial. That is phi. Now we install the firewall against infinite regress. You know the child's why ladder. Why is the sky blue? Because molecules scatter light. Why do they scatter light that way? Because of electromagnetism. Why electromagnetism? Because of gauge structure. Why gauge structure? Because of invariance requirements. Why invariance? Because without it, no stable comparators. Why comparators? Because without comparability, no public facts. And then someone asks, why comparability? Now part 44 speaks. If you ask why comparability, you are already using a difference between good reason and bad reason, answer and non-answer, explain and not explain. Your why is powered by what you are trying to remove. So the chain does not end because we are tired. It ends because the final why eats its own meaning. This is a firewall, not a surrender. It prevents a very common kind of intellectual fraud, the endless promise that we will eventually explain the explainability of explanation using explanation. That promise can be empty, because it confuses the ladder with what ladders stand on. At this point, a careful listener might worry. Is this just a fancy way of saying, stop asking questions? No. The seal is not anti-questioning. It is pro-honesty. It says, ask questions inside the domain where questions have operational content. Ask for predictions. Ask for comparator procedures. Ask for falsification conditions. Ask for error models. Ask for what changes and what stays invariant. But when you ask a question whose very grammar presupposes the thing you are questioning, recognize the loop and do not pretend you have found a deeper floor. This is not stop. This is don't counterfeit. Now we connect part 44 to part 43. Part 43 said, phi can, in principle, look at itself. Self-reference is latent. Part 44 says, and because phi is the condition of distinction, it is also the condition of self and reference. That means something profound. When a sufficiently rich phi pattern forms a self-model, it will naturally encounter the same boundary. It can model many things, but it cannot model the absence of modeling without using the modeling capacity. That is why the deepest philosophical puzzles keep returning. Mind trying to see itself, language trying to define itself, logic trying to ground itself, physics trying to explain its own explainability. Part 44 says, these are not random paradoxes. They are signatures of the same structural fact. The foundation is not a fact among facts. It is the condition that makes fact possible. Now we state the seal again, but as an image you can keep. Imagine a mirror that reflects everything. You stand before it and see your face. You hold up a book and see the book. You hold up a lamp and see the lamp. Then you ask, can the mirror show me its own mirroring? If the mirror tries to show its own mirroring in the same way it shows objects, you get mirror within mirror regress. Image inside image inside image. In practice, the mirror can show you objects, but it cannot show its own reflectiveness as a reflected object without changing the rules. Phi is like that. It enables distinctions between objects, properties, relations, claims, but it cannot be stepped outside of and compared to not phi, because not phi would be the absence of comparability, and the attempt to compare already reintroduces comparability. So phi is not unquestionable by authority. Phi is unquestionable by structure. Now let's do the clean operational statement. Operational circularity statement. Any y phi or outside phi move implicitly requires a distinction between inside, outside, a distinction between valid, invalid, a distinction between success, failure, a distinction between meaning, non-meaning. All of those are phi working. So the question cannot be posed without presupposing the answer. The seal is not metaphysical poetry. It is a constraint on what counts as a coherent request. Now we include the Gödel-style parallel, carefully, without overclaiming. Gödel showed something like this. In formal systems rich enough to encode arithmetic, there are limits to what the system can prove about itself. In particular, a system cannot, by its own internal rules alone, deliver a complete self-certification without stepping into higher-level assumptions. Our situation is analogous in spirit. A framework cannot validate the necessity of the framework from outside the framework without using the framework's own distinguishing machinery. You don't need Gödel to accept part 44. It is just a helpful echo. Foundations often cannot be grounded from below because there is no below that can be spoken without using the foundation. Now we install the falsification criterion one more time with absolute clarity. If you want to falsify part 44, you must do all of the following. 1. Present a conception of reality with no comparability. 2. Make that conception coherent enough to be communicated and shared. 3. Ensure that in presenting it, you do not use distinction implicitly, not even hidden in same, not, one, all, none, before, after, cause, because, true, false, meaning, nothing, everything, uniform, unity, pure. Because every one of those terms is distinction work. This is the hardest falsification challenge in the whole undifferentiated sequence. Not hard because it requires advanced math, but hard because it requires meaning without meaning's condition. If someone succeeds, the seal breaks. Part 44 is honest about the price. If you break it, you break the whole backbone of comparability first foundations. Now, what does this seal give us? What is its value? It gives us finality without dogma. It tells us where the foundation stops, not because we are lazy, but because the shape of questioning closes on itself. It also gives us humility. We don't pretend to have a deeper story than the permission that makes story possible. And it gives us discipline. When someone makes claims like, I have explained reality beyond all foundations, we can ask one simple audit question. What distinctions does your explanation use? If it uses distinctions, it uses phi. If it uses no distinctions, it cannot be communicated as an explanation. This is an anti-fraud device. Now we prepare the handoff to where we're going. Part 45 will tighten this into a stronger uniqueness claim. The exhaustiveness theorem idea, that any deeper than phi proposal either sneaks phi back in or loses public testability. But part 44 had to come first, because part 45 could sound like a mere argumentative victory. Part 44 is not a victory. It is a boundary condition. It says, the ground cannot be placed on the table as one more object to compare, because the table itself is made of comparability. So let's end the way an audio listener can carry it. You're standing on a floor. You can ask, what is on the floor? You can ask, what is under the floor? If you mean pipes, soil, bedrock. But eventually, if you keep demanding what is under, what makes under meaningful, you are no longer digging. You are trying to dig beneath the idea of digging. Phi is that, not a brick under the floor. The permission that makes floor, under, thing, question, and answer possible. And that is why the metaphysical necessity seal is so calm and so final. It does not shout, stop. It simply shows you that the act of questioning has already committed you to Phi. You cannot step outside the lantern light to show the absence of light. You cannot use the eye to see what the world looks like without seeing. You cannot use language to define the possibility of language without using language. You cannot use distinctions to coherently deny distinction. This is not a prison. It is a recognition. And recognition is the first honest move of any science that wants to be firewalled. Questioning Phi uses Phi. Any attempt to conceive a reality without comparability secretly employs comparability to do the conceiving. Why Phi collapses into a loop, not because we refuse the question, but because the question's grammar is powered by what it asks to remove. Phi is not a claim inside reality. It is the condition that makes claims meaningful. The foundation cannot be questioned without standing on it, and that standing is Phi in action. Salam, peace be upon you.